For years now, Harare residents have been crying foul over the invasion and construction on wetlands. Today, we get to go into the field and talk to the experts and the residents themselves about the protection and conservation of wetlands. Join us as we explore.
Hello, so my name is Julia Pierini. I'm the CEO of BirdLife Zimbabwe. We are a nature conservation organization based in Zimbabwe. And so what is a wetland? So wetland is where there is water. So whether it's surface water or underground water. So there are different types of wetlands all over the globe, and in Zimbabwe we have wetlands, rivers, streams, we have dams that are also considered wetlands, but what we also have, which is very, very important, are fragile seasonal wetlands. So that is very, very important to understand why we need to protect them, because they are seasonal. So these, in Harare, for instance, we have headwater wetlands. They are those fragile, very small wetlands that are similar to peatlands, and they, a lot of the year, in the dry season particularly, the water is underground. And there are grassland wetlands. So often if you're passing on the road and you look at the wetland, you think, well, I don't see any water. But if you walk on it, you must understand now it's very spongy. So there are areas that draw in the water. There are lots of different species of grasses that help draw in the water, replenish the underground system, and to make sure that our rivers and streams have water all through the dry season. So they're very, very critically important. So headwater wetlands. There are other towns in Zimbabwe that are also being affected, for instance, by having their catchment dam sort of downstream from the city or the town, like Harare, Rusape. And generally what happens there is that the catchment area gets developed and the dam is now affected. So whatever happens upstream, headwater wetlands, affects the dam downstreams. Thank you. All right.
Can you provide an overview of the current state of wetlands in Harare?
In Harare?
Yeah.
So in Harare, the Environmental Management Agency had done a report in 2020 that listed 50% of wetlands, the remaining wetlands had disappeared. Due to development and general degradation. So that was in 2020. So since then, unfortunately, there's been a lot of ongoing development on wetlands, and so we are much further down the line. So this is very, very serious, because this is our water supply. Wetlands are our primary water supply, and so what is happening to the wetlands in Harare will impact not only current residents, but going into the future, the water capacity for the city. So a lot of people are now, relying on underground water in terms of wells and boreholes, and there's an urgent need to regulate that to ensure, sustainability of water, having water available.
All right. What are the major challenges and threats that are facing the wetlands in Harare?
Well, it's space. So the remaining open spaces in Harare are all wetlands. Harare is a wetland city. So we are sitting on our wetlands. The city is growing. The population is growing, the demand for water is increasing, and the demand for housing, for development is also increasing. So that poses huge pressure on these remaining wetlands. So government has done an incredibly good thing. Last year they declared wetlands as ecologically sensitive areas in many parts of Harare, but also in Zimbabwe. So these areas have been gazetted. The challenge is that through the EI process, you can still develop on them. So the legislation needs to be strengthened. Policy and legislation needs to be strengthened. The wetland policy identifies as wetlands as incredibly important. However, you can still develop on them. Also, the problem is that many wetland areas have been alienated to the private sector. So now people are owning wetlands. So it's a few people that want to develop their areas. How do we deal with that? Because ultimately it's water for the whole city, for millions of residents. How do we deal with that going forward? What are the options? We have to look for solutions, and it's really critically important that we do that, because that is also affecting what's happening outside of Harare. Even in Mount Hamden, areas are being developed that are wetlands. People have invested in properties, in developing houses, only to find in the rainy season, oh my goodness, I'm being flooded. So flooded and no drinking water. So that's the kind of situation that we want to avoid. And so really implementing restrictions, providing a legal framework for wetlands that recognizes they're critically important as natural infrastructure for the city of Harare is really very important, and making those hard decisions. So once you make a hard decision, the solutions will come. Is it compensation? Could we find funding in order for these very, very important areas to be protected, primarily for water, also for purification of water. We have big problems also with pollution of water. So, wetlands are, so they purify water. They also flood attenuators. We have seen, in the rainy season, there are many areas that are getting flooded. Buririro is one of them. And, so we can't have that vicious circle going round and round. We need to find those solutions. So, upping the legal protection for wetlands is, and wetlands in general, but also for Ramsar sites. We're finding that Ramsar sites, ultimately at the end of the day, through the EI process, they can still be developed. The issue of private ownership of wetlands is also something critically important that needs to be addressed.
Okay, so you mentioned that a lot of people, and especially the private sector, are now finding themselves owning wetlands. Is there a sustainable way of developing on wetlands?
Well, as I'd mentioned prior to this, we've already lost 50% of our wetlands. So that was in 2020. So where are we now? So if we've already lost 50% of our wetlands, what we need to do with the remaining wetlands, given that the city continues to grow, and the population of Harare continues to grow, the demand for water continues to grow. So what we need to do is that these wetlands need to be restored to their natural state. So we have a model for restoration, and that is the Monovel Ramsar site. We are standing here right now. So all the different types of grasses, all the different types of life forms that are in this wetland ensure that this ecosystem is a functioning ecosystem and will provide water for people. So, I sort of like to give the example of a functioning ecosystem as to your motor of a Mercedes-Benz. So you've got lots of components of your motor. When they're all together functioning, this is a sleek, racing machine, isn't that so? When you start pulling things out and think, oh, well, let me put a house here, the motor doesn't function very well. And then we say, oh, well, it's climate change. So we don't want to blame climate change, and it's very easy to, because we are, drying up. I mean, this year is certainly a very, very extraordinary dry year. I think we can acknowledge that. We're all wondering, when is the rain coming? Is it going to come? Very, very serious implications for water availability and for development all over the country. It's not just Harare. So these ecologically sensitive areas need to be protected. And, and so it's really very urgent. So they need to be restored to their natural state. Right. And recognize recognized that that is natural infrastructure and is functioning for us. Because what we do have noticed, there's very poor understanding, what is biodiversity? Why is having 200 plant species, on a wetland important? Why are the birds important? Why are the insects important? Why are the frogs important? These are very, very good indicators to the state of the environment. It's really very, very important that these are many animals give alarm calls. For us at BirdLife, the birds give us alarm calls. So one of the things we monitor birds all over the city, all over Zimbabwe actually, and you notice that what we're not doing, we look at a space, and when the birds no longer occur in a space, we wonder why. And one of the things is to look at the entirety of the ecosystem. So in terms of wetlands, we need to look at the catchment areas. So it's critically important as we go forward, we need to be looking at catchment management to ensure that the wetlands continue to produce water for us into the future.
All right. Are there any specific wetlands areas in Harare that are particularly at risk or in need of urgent conservation efforts?
All of them.
No, I mean specifically maybe if you have the ones that you've been monitoring. Maybe I think you mentioned about Marlborough, something like that, yeah, and then here in Monaville as well.
Yeah, so Marlborough is a very, very large wetland. It's a very, very important wetland for Harare's wetland ecosystem, and it's mostly privately owned. So as I mentioned before, the issue of private ownership. So maybe the owners now say, okay, I'm not going to do anything, but afterwards they sell it to somebody, and then somebody says, no, I want to put 3,000 or whatever cluster houses, So that removes the biodiversity. So that removes those components of your Mercedes-Benz engine and stops it functioning. So Marlborough is largely impacted by cultivation. So cultivation on wetlands, headwater wetlands, these fragile wetlands, is absolutely disastrous. First of all, it's monoculture. So one species of plant compared to hundreds. I mean, if you look on Monavale, they've counted over 200 species of plants on this small area. So you're looking at monoculture, every plant has a function, part of that Mercedes-Benz motor. So monoculture is devastating to ecosystems. It's one plant species removing the biodiversity. And because there's only one plant species, there are less insects, there are less birds, and the birds are telling us, giving us a warning signal. The ecosystem it will falter. And how do we see the impact of that? The rivers start running dry. So Marlborough is very, very impacted. Another big problem that is the fragmentation of wetlands around Harare, and that's going all over the place. Until about 15 to 20 years ago, the wetland areas were left alone, and it was because they were wet. And people say, "Oh, I know you don't want to develop there." They were wet. Now the pressure is on because there is limited space, but there are options to limited space. We can. Other towns and cities can be brought to life, and it doesn't have to be everybody living in Harare. Some people may not agree with me, but in actual fact you have to look at the carrying capacity of the city and then say, right, let's in Zimbabwe we have space, and then we fix the roads, we put in public transport. People travel all over the world. If you look in other countries, there's lots of opportunities for people to be connected to major centers, and so it's already happening. A lot of people live in Rua, a lot of people live in Norton, except they're also being affected by the water issue in Harare, and that is a reality.
All right. So are there ongoing collaboration or partnerships between the Harare Wetlands Trust and other organizations or government agencies to address wetlands conservation?
Oh, absolutely. As a civil society and sort of resident community, we have been working extensively. With the Conservation Society of Monavale, which are the residents that, together with Emma and the ministry, manage the Monavale site. We've been, as BirdLife, collaborating since the early 2000s. So the issue of wetlands has been a long time coming. And then since then, as the awareness has grown, there are very, very many community-based organizations around the city of Harare that are facing wetland issues, that working together with Harare Wetlands Trust, BirdLife Zimbabwe and Cosmo, and resident associations, working together with government, with local authorities, with the Ministry of Environment, with the Ministry of Local Government. It's critical, that collaboration coming together, and the opportunity we have now is we can upscale that collaboration as we head towards July 2025 and the Ramsar COP15 that will take place in Victoria Falls, which is extremely exciting because as Zimbabwe, civil society, communities, government, we all want to showcase our wetlands and the incredible work that's been done. If you look at Harare is almost unique because it's got 2 Ramsar sites within the city. There are not many cities that have that. And the Ramsar site outside, Chivero, how many cities around the world have 3 Ramsar sites within its, area? It's very, very unusual. And then, we have Victoria Falls, which is the Ramsar site. So it's very, very exciting. What are the opportunities? And also opportunity going towards COP15 of declaring other areas Ramsar sites, because recognize the importance of these sites for provision of water that will sustain our development plans for Zimbabwe is really critically important.
Okay, just rounding up, can you give maybe an advice, especially to local authorities? Because we've heard, especially when those houses flooded, many were blaming the local authority for actually giving out stands on such wetlands. So what kind of an advice can you give to the local authorities in terms of giving out stands and protecting wetlands?
Yeah, so what I can say is that so the local authorities, and there's also local government. So we've got local authorities land, City of Harare land, and you've got also state land, and then you've got EMA. So those are the key authorities in the allowing development on wetlands, because ultimately, so from a local authority's perspective, it's really very important that they work closely with EMA to understand, is this wetland or is not wetland, and to look at the wetland as an ecosystem, not as a piece of land. Because what is also happening is the allocation, and this is what I mentioned previously, is fragmentation, allocation of land, and it's part of the wetland. And so the wetland is being fragmented because people are being allowed to develop. It says, you can develop here, but not here, and it's still the same ecosystem. And what we're not looking at, which is very, very dangerous, is at the impact of these developments. You think, but people need to build, but they own the land. But the impact, the water is declining. So the water is declining, the bird species are declining. Those are warning signals. You think, the birds, who needs the birds? They are our indicators, very, very important indicators of the state of the environment. Healthy ecosystems are abundant biodiversity. And where there is abundant biodiversity, humans live a healthy life. I just wanted to say something that I heard on the news recently. They were talking about a survey done in Australia, and one of the things that I think it will resonate with many of us in recent times is the increase in temperature. So there have been low-cost housing that have been developed in Australia, and the people that are living in those low-cost housing are being impacted by the heat, because the housing is so close together. There is nothing, there's not even a blade of grass or a tree. And I think many of us can already think about in Harare where that is already happening. You know, I can name a few areas, and when I was listening to the survey, I was thinking, oh, and they were saying that a lot of the people living in these houses are being affected by the heat, and there's no recourse. How do they escape from the heat? They don't have funds to put air conditioning. So wetlands are also temperature regulators, and I think we can relate to that because it's been very hot. So we need these regulators for temperature. So we need water purification, regulators, flood attenuators. These wetlands are working for us for free.
My name is Rone Chirimota. I'm the Conservation Officer for BirdLife Zimbabwe, and I'm also the Conservation Officer for Marlborough Environmental Action Group. Then my definition of wetlands would be that they are areas that are saturated by water, either permanently or seasonally. I think that is how best I would define wetlands. They act like sponges that absorb the water. So yeah, permanently seasoned or permanently flooded or seasonally flooded.
All right. Harare residents have been crying foul over construction on wetlands. Are there any specific wetlands areas in Harare which are at risk, which need urgent conservation?
Considering that Harare has lost over 50% of its wetlands, I would say that all the wetlands that we have in Harare are in urgent need of conservation needs. But then I would say that maybe Monaville Flay would be one of the key priorities, since it is a Ramsar site, together with Cleveland Dam or Cleveland Ramsar site, because the catchment for Cleveland is actually under threat from sand mining. So it's actually affecting the water that is then going towards the dam. Then other wetlands that might need urgent assistance would be Marlborough Flay. It's currently there are no threats of development, but there are issues of cultivation. So I would say that those are some of the areas that are in urgent need of conservation.
Okay. How can Harare residents contribute to the preservation and protection of wetlands in the city?
I think one of the main things that they can do to contribute is basically raising awareness when they see any development that is taking place on their wetlands. And this would involve engaging the Environmental Management Agency, the local authority, your Zinwa, your Upper Manyame, just to try and get more information about any possible developments, find out whether they are legal or they are illegal, and also engage the local authority about the development plans for their areas, if there are any development plans and if that development fits within that framework. And also with regards to EMA, engaging them regarding the wetland map that was produced. Try and figure out whether the development that is proposed is proposed on the wetland site or it's on a non-wetland site.
All right. So from your surveys as the Wetlands Trust, what are some of the main reasons why some residents have settled on wetlands in Harare?
The main reason is the need for accommodation. Everyone believes that Harare is an economic hub of the country, so the economic opportunities are more to be found in Harare than anywhere else. So people are seeking accommodation in Harare, and because most of the land has been built on, the suitable land has been built on, the only other areas available are on wetlands. And this is now resulting in an influx on people wanting to develop on wetlands. Then also because there is no local environmental action plan, a LEAP, and a master plan within the city of Harare, it's now resulting in unplanned developments or settlements, and this has now resulted in residents occupying those wetland areas.
All right. So from your surveys as well, are the residents aware of the potential risks and consequences of settling on wetlands?
I think that it varies depending on person. For some people, they are quite aware of the risks, and some, that's why they avoid them. Whilst for others, they claim that they will only be affected during the rainy season. So in that time, that's when their houses get flooded. So maybe from January to March or April, that's when they are affected. They leave their houses, find somewhere else to rent, and then spend most of the year with their houses where they are dry and they will not be flooded. So they say that they are only affected during that time, so it won't be too much of an issue to them.
Okay, so looking at how some of the houses were flooded during the recent past, what are the residents' perspectives on the efforts made by Harare Residents Trust and other organizations in protecting wetlands?
Those who are affected, they actually support the initiatives that were taken in terms of trying to protect the wetlands, and some are saying that they were handed the land illegally by City of Harare, although they should not have been done. So they are in support, whereas others, they still maintain that it was just heavy rains that happened, and they don't really understand that their houses were flooded because of their houses being located on a wetland, and not because there were heavy rains that were received. It's because that the area that they are on is a wetland. That wetland acts like a sponge, so it's absorbing the water, and then that water is then going into their houses.
All right. Now I'm going to come to you as a resident. What are the residents' expectations from the government and local authorities in terms of wetlands protection and management?
I think the first thing that residents expect is water. They expect clean water. So the expectation is that these areas should be managed effectively so that residents are able to access clean water. And also the second expectation is that we're looking at living in a clean environment. And the more the wetlands are protected, then that means that people are going to reside in a clean environment. Then another thing is that as residents, we expect that the constitution should be upheld. And our constitution talks about the need to protect these wetlands. And this is also the reason why Zimbabwe is a signatory to the Ramsar Convention, and which calls for the protection of these wetlands. And this is the reason why Zimbabwe put up its hand to host the Ramsar COP15 in Victoria Falls in 2025. So it just shows that these are areas that should be protected. And since it's part of the constitution, our expectation as residents is that more effort should be in place so that to conserve these areas.
All right. So just looking at how wetlands have been invaded and constructed on, what are some of the imminent risks that we face as a nation and as a city?
The most imminent threat is a shortage of water. As it is, Harare is facing acute shortages of water. And the more that these things continue to happen, it means that there's going to be more and more shortages of water. Lake Chivero has lost 20% of its holding capacity due to siltation. It means that that lake is going to be affected, and that is the supply dam that provides water for Harare residents. So the more that these invasions continue and that have already transpired, it means that we are going to continue facing more and more water shortages. And without water, there is no life.
My name is Jimmy Muropa. I'm the conservation officer for Monaville Flay, which is in Monaville, and also it's one of the 7 Ramsar sites that we have in Zimbabwe. Okay.
How aware are residents of Harare about the importance of wetlands and their role in water provision?
I think much of Harare's residents are very much aware of the importance and roles of wetlands. Firstly, I think they do understand and believe that that's where we get our water from, and that's very important. And as we know, Harare is actually facing a critical shortage of water within its residents. So I think they are very much aware that our drinking water or for other uses, it comes from such areas. So these are areas where there's permanently or seasonally indebted with water.
All right. Have Harare residents noticed any changes or degradation in wetlands areas in Harare over the years?
Oh yes, very much so. I think they have noticed because there's a lot of pressure on land, and much of the land is actually wetlands. Remember, Harare actually sits on its watershed, its drinking water source. So over the years, I think the residents have actually noticed that some of these wetlands have been actually degraded and have been by way of cultivation, building houses, and for commercial purposes. So over the years, and the shortage of water, which directly relates to the residents, is I think a big pointer to the importance and value of these wetland ecosystems that we do have.
All right. How can residents actively participate in the preservation and conservation of wetlands in Harare?
I think the most immediate thing for me is wherever a resident is living, they would take stewardship, ownership of their local wetlands in trying to conserve them, protect them. How do they do it? I think they would form like community groups. They engage their local councillors or leadership, their local authorities, and try to have measures to conserve and preserve their immediate wetlands within their communities that they are living with. I think it's a positive that has been done over the years with communities trying to take care of their wetlands, their immediate wetlands, wherever they live. I think that's very possible.
All right. With the imminent risk that residents face, what words can you say to those people who are responsible for the wetlands invasion and construction on wetlands?
I think it's not viable and sustainable in the long term, because without wetlands there is no water. So it is imperative that we need to start taking action immediately, if not yesterday, if you ask me, because there's been a lot of pressure on these wetlands, and it's unfortunate that sometimes some of this degradation is going on unabated, but we should find measures to control that, because if we need water, definitely we need the wetlands to be intact for that service to be provided. You know, it's like when you do wetlands, their functions, some of their functions are unseen by people because it happens underground. All the more reason to protect them, apart from the physical aspects that you see outside, like the biodiversity, which are very good indicators of the nature or how healthy wetland ecosystems are. So it's high time that residents and authorities, I think, take much action to conserve and protect these wetlands.
Well, there you have it. The protection of bird life, biodiversity, and the natural ecosystem is very much important and must be protected at all costs. Join us next time.